You've made it to the soft scoop where the headlines are soft and the stories are slower, and the goal is simple, to help you relax, unwind, and maybe even drift off. Let's catch up, quietly. Once upon a time, the kings of hip-hop were untouchable. Draped in fur coats and diamond chains, they ruled stages, boardrooms, and culture itself. Their word was law, their image invincible. They built empires out of rhyme and rhythm, launched fashion labels, luxury liquor brands, and talent pipelines that fed generations. And for a long time, one of the most visible, powerful, and untouchable kings was Sean Diddy Combs. But in 2025, that empire is cracking. Because Diddy is now the subject of a federal trial that threatens to not only dismantle his legacy, but to mark a cultural shift long overdue. A reckoning that hip-hop has, until now, managed to avoid. Let's take a soft step back and unfold this moment carefully. In the dimming light of an empire built on beats and ambition, we find ourselves at a cultural crossroads. The music plays on, but the room has changed. The air feels heavier now, charged with questions long avoided and truths long whispered. This is the story of a genre confronting its shadows, of an industry examining its conscience, and of a culture deciding what it's willing to tolerate in the name of art and entertainment. For decades, hip-hop has operated as both revolutionary force and reflection of American reality, raw, ambitious, complicated, and at times deeply contradictory. It gave voice to the voiceless, created billionaires from the concrete, and transformed global culture while maintaining a complicated relationship with accountability, especially regarding power and gender. At the center of this storm now stands Sean Diddy Combs, once hip-hop's ultimate success story, now its most prominent cautionary tale. The mansion gates that once symbolized arrival now frame a different narrative entirely. The parties that defined an era of excess are being re-examined through a darker lens. The man who helped craft hip-hop's journey from cultural rebellion to corporate boardroom now finds himself facing a federal trial that threatens to unravel not just his personal legacy, but to force an entire culture to confront its relationship with power, silence, and complicity. By spring 2025, what began with a lawsuit filed by his former partner Cassie Ventura in November 2023 has expanded into a sprawling federal case including allegations of sex trafficking, racketeering, surveillance, and violence. The ensuing investigation has upended hip-hop's careful balance between mythology and reality, forcing a conversation that the culture has managed to defer despite multiple warning signs. To understand the significance of this moment, we have to understand what Diddy represented. He wasn't just an artist or executive, he became the personification of hip-hop's commercial ascension. From humble beginnings in Harlem, his rise symbolized possibility. He helped transform Biggie Smalls into an icon. He brought hip-hop aesthetics to Madison Avenue. He showed that success didn't need to be compromised or diluted. It could be amplified, broadcast in high definition, draped in luxury. In the 90s, while artists brought the authenticity, Diddy brought the marketing vision. He understood image in a way few others did. He turned songs into events, videos into mini-films, and artists into brands. The shiny suit era, the infamous white parties in the Hamptons, the multiple business ventures, each became another chapter in hip-hop's evolution from cultural resistance to commercial dominance. His blueprint was clear. Don't just make music, make movements. Don't just sign deals, create companies. Don't just attend culture, shape it. For many young entrepreneurs, particularly those from marginalized communities, Diddy represented proof that the American dream could be accessible even to those the system wasn't designed for. His bravado wasn't just personality, it was permission. Permission to dream beyond limitations, to desire without apology, to demand seats at tables previously closed. This is why the current moment carries such cultural weight. Because tearing down Diddy isn't just about one man's alleged crimes, it's about questioning a narrative that has sustained hope and ambition for generations of artists and entrepreneurs who saw in him a path forward. But what happens when the path is revealed to have been built on exploitation? The allegations against Diddy paint a portrait of a man who allegedly used his power not just to elevate but to dominate, not just to influence but to control. Former partners describe scenarios of manipulation, surveillance, and coercion that were hidden behind the veneer of luxury and access. They describe a pattern: isolation, intimidation, and violence, followed by gifts, opportunities, and charm. the cycle of abuse dressed in Versace. What makes these allegations even more disturbing is how they allegedly operated in plain sight. At industry functions, in recording studios, behind the velvet ropes of VIP sections where power dynamics ensured silence. The whispers were there, but the music was louder. The rumors circulated, but the profits continued flowing. The red flags were visible, but the industry chose to look away. This raises uncomfortable questions about collective responsibility, about who knew what, when, about an industry architecture that prioritizes talent and profit over safety and ethics, about fans who separated the art from the artist until that separation became unsustainable. The music industry has notoriously lagged behind other entertainment sectors in confronting abuses of power. While Hollywood had its Me Too moment, while tech companies faced reckonings, while sports leagues implemented protocols, music, and hip-hop specifically, maintained a code of silence that protected its powerful figures from serious consequence. This silence wasn't accidental, it was structural. Built into contracts, reinforced through industry relationships, maintained through economic incentives that made speaking out professionally suicidal. To challenge a figure like Diddy wasn't just to risk a job, it was to risk an entire career network. In an industry built on connections, being labeled difficult or disloyal could close countless doors. For women especially, and particularly women of color, coming forward meant facing not just potential industry blacklisting, but also cultural rejection. Hip-hop's complex relationship with gender meant that female accusers were often dismissed, disbelieved, or demonized. Their stories were drowned out by hit singles or buried under marketing campaigns. Their trauma became collateral damage in the machinery of entertainment. This dynamic isn't unique to hip-hop, but the genre's specific history intensifies the contradiction. Born as a voice of resistance against systemic oppression, hip-hop has always carried an intrinsic tension: how to challenge certain power structures while reinforcing others, how to demand justice from society while sometimes denying it within the culture, how to speak truth to external power while maintaining internal hierarchies that could be just as damaging. Now, in 2025, that contradiction can no longer be sustained. The dam has broken, the silence is ending, and an industry built on carefully constructed images is being forced to confront realities it long ignored. What makes this moment unique is its potential ripple effect. Diddy wasn't operating in isolation. His behavior, if proven, was enabled by an ecosystem of handlers, employees, industry executives, and bystanders who chose business as usual over intervention. Each allegation raises questions not just about one man's actions, but about an entire industry infrastructure that may have prioritized profit over protection. Some defenders have suggested that Diddy is being targeted, that his race makes him vulnerable to prosecution in ways white executives might avoid. There's validity to questioning whether justice is being applied evenly across the industry. But valid questions about systemic racism in the justice system don't negate victims' experiences or excuse alleged predatory behavior. The complexity of this case lies precisely in this intersection of race, power, gender, and accountability. It forces us to hold multiple truths simultaneously: that the criminal justice system has historically targeted successful Black men unfairly, and that powerful men of all races have used their positions to harm others without consequence. That hip-hop has created unprecedented opportunity for Black entrepreneurship, and that it has sometimes perpetuated harmful dynamics toward women and vulnerable individuals. The cultural processing happening now isn't just about Diddy, it's about confronting these contradictions honestly. For many longtime hip-hop fans, this moment triggers complex emotions: nostalgia for the music that shaped their lives, disappointment in heroes revealed to have human failings, anger at systems that allowed harm to continue, confusion about how to reconcile artistic legacy with personal wrongdoing. The music that once brought joy now carries uncomfortable associations. The videos that defined eras now reveal problematic dynamics in plain sight. The lifestyle once glorified now seems to mask darker realities. This cognitive dissonance is part of the cultural processing, the necessary pain of growth. What's notable about 2025's hip-hop landscape is how newer generations are approaching these revelations differently than their predecessors. Artists coming of age in the post-Me Too era are more willing to question industry power structures, to demand accountability, and to reject the notion that exploitation is the necessary price of entry to creative industries. Social media has democratized voices in ways unimaginable during hip-hop's earlier decades. Fans can directly challenge artists and executives. Victims can share stories without traditional media gatekeepers. Consumers can make values-based decisions about whose art they support. This technological shift has fundamentally altered the accountability landscape, making the old codes of silence increasingly difficult to maintain. The impact extends beyond Diddy himself. Other industry figures are being re-evaluated. Past incidents, once dismissed as just how things were, are being reconsidered through contemporary ethical frameworks. Artists who spoke out years ago, often facing ridicule or exile, are being vindicated. The industry's ledger is being balanced, albeit decades late. This reassessment isn't limited to executives. It extends to the music itself, to lyrics that normalize certain behaviors, to videos that objectified women, to a celebrity culture that confused exploitation with empowerment. It asks us to examine which aspects of hip-hop's hard-won freedom of expression crossed into license for harm. For younger artists navigating this shifting landscape, the message is both cautionary and hopeful. The cautionary note is clear: power without ethics eventually implodes. Success built on exploitation isn't sustainable. The industry's old guard learned that accountability could be deferred, but never completely avoided. The hopeful message is equally powerful. A new framework is possible. Success doesn't require compromising basic human dignity. Art can be revolutionary without being exploitative. Power can be used to elevate rather than control. This evolution isn't about sanitizing hip-hop or denying its roots in raw expression. It's about distinguishing between artistic provocation and actual harm, between controversial art and abusive behavior, between challenging society's norms and violating individuals' boundaries. The allegations against Diddy fit a disturbing pattern that extends beyond any single genre or industry. They reflect dynamics present in religious institutions, academic settings, political organizations, and corporate environments. Wherever significant power imbalances exist, the potential for abuse follows. What makes the entertainment industry particularly vulnerable is its blurring of professional and personal boundaries, its non-traditional work environments, and its celebration of excess as part of the creative experience. Those conditions created perfect storms for exploitation, especially in an era before cell phone documentation, before widespread understanding of concepts like coercive control, and before victims had platforms to connect their previously isolated experiences into recognizable patterns. What's happening now is the painful but necessary correction, the reckoning delayed by decades of silence, enabled by structures of power, and maintained through fear. The trial of Diddy represents not just legal proceedings against one man, but the cultural processing of a genre's complicated relationship with accountability. If the allegations prove true, we're witnessing the dissolution of an empire built on parallel narratives, the public success story and the private reality of harm. The tension between these narratives reflects broader contradictions within hip-hop itself, a culture simultaneously revolutionary and reactionary, both challenging oppression and sometimes reinforcing it, creating unprecedented opportunity while sometimes perpetuating exploitation. This moment asks difficult questions about how we consume art, about what responsibilities fame carries, about the true cost of success if achieved through domination rather than collaboration. It challenges the industry to create structures that prevent harm rather than cover it up afterward. It demands that fans reconcile their love for the music with the human cost of its creation. For hip-hop specifically, this reckoning arrives at a pivotal moment in the genre's evolution. No longer the upstart outsider, but the dominant commercial force in global music. Hip-hop has achieved the mainstream success its pioneers could hardly imagine. That very success brings new responsibilities, to its history, to its community, and to its future. The question isn't whether hip-hop will survive this moment of accountability, but what version of hip-hop will emerge from it. Will it be a culture that learns from this painful lesson? That creates systems protecting the vulnerable from the powerful? That challenges exploitation within its ranks as fiercely as it challenged external oppression? These questions remain unanswered, their resolution dependent on choices made by industry leaders, artists, and fans in this watershed moment. What's clear is that the old model, where accusations disappeared behind settlements, where victims were silenced through NDAs, where industry figures closed ranks around the accused, is collapsing under the weight of accumulated harm. The economic incentives that once made silence profitable are shifting as consumers increasingly make values-based decisions about the art and artists they support. The psychological impact of this moment extends beyond the immediate case. For survivors of similar abuse within the industry, watching these allegations become public carries complicated emotions: validation of experiences long denied, grief for years, loss to trauma, anger at systems that protected perpetrators, hope that actual change might finally be possible. For those who worked adjacent to these alleged situations, the assistants, security personnel, studio engineers, and industry professionals who may have witnessed concerning behavior but lacked power to intervene, this moment triggers difficult reflection about complicity and courage, about the morality of silence in the face of suspected harm. For the generation that grew up with Diddy as cultural icon, his fall represents a loss of innocence, forcing a reevaluation of formative cultural moments now revealed to have potentially darker undertones. The nostalgia for 90s and 2000s hip-hop becomes complicated by awareness of what may have been happening behind the scenes, by the recognition that the lifestyle once glorified may have enabled systematic harm. This cultural processing mirrors other moments of collective disillusionment, when beloved institutions or figures are revealed to have failed profound moral tests. The pain of this recognition is proportional to the importance these cultural touchstones held in our lives. For many, hip-hop wasn't just entertainment. It was identity formation, community building, and emotional sanctuary. Having that sanctuary revealed as potentially unsafe is a unique form of betrayal. Yet amidst this necessary reckoning, we should be careful not to paint an entire genre or community with a single brush. Hip-hop has always contained multitudes: conscious rappers alongside materialists, feminist voices alongside misogynistic ones, exploitation alongside empowerment. The genre's diversity of expression reflects the complexity of the communities that created it. What's happening now isn't the indictment of hip-hop as a whole, but rather the overdue confrontation with specific harmful dynamics that were allowed to persist within it. Many artists have created within this culture without causing harm, have achieved success without exploitation, have used their platforms to elevate rather than dominate. Their legacies shouldn't be tarnished by association. The most valuable outcome of this painful moment would be structural change, the creation of accountability systems that prevent future abuse, rather than address it after the fact. This means rethinking power dynamics within record labels, establishing industry-wide reporting protocols for misconduct, creating meaningful consequences for abusive behavior regardless of an individual's commercial value, and centering the voices of those historically marginalized within industry decisions. It also means examining the economic structures that make speaking out so costly. When careers depend entirely on relationships and reputation, when whistleblowers face certain professional suicide, when NDAs bury legitimate complaints, the incentives all align toward silence. Changing this requires not just individual courage, but systemic reimagining of how the industry functions. For hip-hop to truly evolve beyond this moment, it must reconcile its revolutionary roots with its current commercial dominance. The genre that once prided itself on brutal honesty about social reality must turn that same unflinching gaze inward, examining which aspects of its culture have enabled harm, and which have created unprecedented opportunity for communities historically excluded from wealth and influence. This introspection is already happening in real time through music itself. A new generation of artists is exploring these contradictions through their work, maintaining hip-hop's essential authenticity while rejecting the notion that exploitation is an acceptable price for success. They're proving that the genre can evolve without losing its cultural power, that accountability strengthens rather than diminishes creative expression. Legal proceedings move at their own pace, but cultural processing happens in real time. Whatever the eventual verdict in Diddy's federal case, the conversation it has catalyzed cannot be undone. The questions raised cannot be unasked. The painful recognition of how power operated in the shadows cannot be forgotten. This, perhaps, is the most significant impact, the collective awakening to patterns previously normalized. There's a particular poignancy to this reckoning occurring now, as hip-hop celebrates its 5th decade. The genre has matured from youthful rebellion to middle-aged institution, gaining unprecedented commercial power while sometimes losing the hunger that defined its early innovation. This moment of accountability might represent a necessary evolution, the genre's coming of age in a deeper sense. When cultures reach this stage of development, they face crucial choices about which values to carry forward and which which to leave behind. Hip-hop stands at this crossroads now, confronting the contradictions that were sustainable in youth but become destructive in maturity. The question isn't whether the culture will survive this moment, but what version of itself it will choose to become. For victims whose stories are only now being heard, this evolution comes painfully late. The years lost to trauma cannot be recovered. The careers derailed cannot be fully restored. The silence endured cannot be retroactively broken. This recognition should temper any triumphalism about the current moment of accountability. It represents progress, yes, but progress that came at tremendous human cost to those who suffered while waiting for the culture to catch up to their reality. Yet even with this sobering awareness, there's power in this moment of collective reckoning. There's healing potential in naming patterns previously normalized. There's possibility in reimagining industry structures with protection rather than exploitation at their center. There's hope in the next generation's refusal to accept harmful dynamics as the necessary price of creative success. What happens next depends on whether this moment becomes a true inflection point or merely a temporary disturbance in business as usual. Will the industry implement meaningful structural changes or simply distance itself from one fallen figure while maintaining the systems that enabled him? Will consumers demand higher ethical standards from the culture they support or return to separating art from artist once the headlines fade? Will artists use their platforms to challenge exploitative dynamics or retreat into the safety of silence? The answers to these questions will determine whether 2025 represents a genuine transformation in hip-hop's relationship with power and accountability, or simply a momentary disruption in a cycle destined to repeat. What's certain is that we've reached a point of no return. The conversation has begun. The questions have been asked. The patterns have been named. Even if some would prefer to return to comfortable silence, that option no longer exists. Too many voices have joined the chorus. Too many experiences have been shared. Too many connections have been made between previously isolated incidents. This is the meaning of cultural reckoning, the moment when collective awareness shifts irreversibly, when what was once accepted becomes unacceptable, when silence becomes more costly than speech. For hip-hop, a culture born from giving voice to uncomfortable truths about American reality, this moment represents both crisis and opportunity. The crisis lies in confronting compromises made in the pursuit of success, in recognizing how revolutionary spirit sometimes curdled into reactionary power. The opportunity lies in reclaiming the genre's core truth-telling function, in applying to itself the same unflinching honesty it brought to examining society's hypocrisies. This isn't about purifying the genre or denying its roots in raw expression. It's about distinguishing between authentic artistic voice and exploitative behavior, between challenging society's norms and violating individuals' humanity. It's about recognizing that true creative freedom flourishes in environments of safety rather than fear, in cultures of consent rather than coercion. The Diddy trial will eventually conclude. The legal questions will find their answers in courtrooms, but the cultural questions raised will continue to reverberate far beyond any verdict. They ask us to examine not just one man's alleged actions, but an entire industry's tolerance for harm. They challenge not just one executive's methods, but an entire culture's relationship with power. The path forward requires holding multiple truths simultaneously, that hip-hop has created unprecedented opportunity and perpetuated harmful dynamics, that the genre deserves celebration for its revolutionary impact and critical examination of its internal contradictions, that accountability might be painful in the short term, but essential for long-term cultural health. What emerges from this crucible moment won't be a sanitized version of hip-hop, stripped of its essential authenticity and edge. Rather, it could be a more mature expression of the culture, one that maintains its revolutionary spirit while evolving beyond dynamics that harm its own community, one that challenges external oppression without reinforcing internal exploitation, one that speaks truth to power regardless of whether that power comes from outside the culture or within it. The ultimate legacy of this moment won't be the fall of one man's empire, however spectacular that collapse might be. It will be the potential foundation of a more equitable industry, the possible creation of safer creative spaces, the hopeful emergence of a culture that measures success not just in wealth accumulated, but in harm avoided. This is the reckoning hip-hop has deferred for decades, necessary, painful, overdue, and potentially transformative. if the culture chooses to embrace rather than evade the difficult questions now unavoidably present in the conversation. For those who love hip-hop, who found identity, community, and voice through this culture, this moment asks for faith in its resilience. The genre has continuously evolved through decades of external pressure and internal contradiction. It has survived moral panics, commercial co-option, and generational shifts. It will survive this necessary accountability moment, not despite confronting its shadows, but because of it. The question isn't whether hip-hop culture will continue. The question is what version of hip-hop culture will emerge from this crucible, and whether it will finally align its treatment of those within the culture with the justice it has always demanded from society at large. That alignment represents not betrayal of hip-hop's essence, but its fullest realization, the completion of a revolutionary vision that demands integrity, not just from systems of oppression, but from ourselves. Not just from society's institutions, but from our own cultural spaces. This is the potential transformation embedded within this painful moment, the possibility that from this reckoning might emerge a culture that maintains its essential truth-telling function while evolving beyond dynamics that harmed its own community. A culture that recognizes that true revolutionary potential lies not in replicating oppressive power structures, but in creating liberatory alternatives. The road to this transformation runs directly through uncomfortable truth, through acknowledgement of harm caused, through listening to voices long silenced, through examining patterns long normalized, through questioning what aspects of the culture need preservation and which require evolution. This process won't be linear or simple. It will involve disagreement, debate, and differing perspectives on how accountability should operate within the culture. It will require distinguishing between problematic art and actual harm, between provocative expression and exploitation, between artistic freedom and ethical responsibility. What matters most is that the conversation continues, that this moment doesn't fade into another footnote in hip-hop history, but marks an actual turning point in the culture's relationship with power and accountability. That the voices raised now continue to resonate beyond any single case or controversy. Because ultimately, this isn't just about one man's alleged crimes. It's about an entire culture deciding what it's willing to tolerate, what success is worth, and which values it will carry forward into its next evolutionary stage. The greatest tribute hip-hop could pay to its revolutionary origins would be to turn its truth-telling power inward, to examine its own contradictions with the same unflinching honesty it brought to examining society's hypocrisies, to demand justice not just from oppressive systems but within its own community, to create space for voices that challenge not just external power, but internal exploitation. This is the potential embedded within this painful moment, the possibility that from crisis might emerge clarity, from reckoning might come renewal, from confronting shadows might come more authentic light. The story of hip-hop has always been one of resilience, reinvention, and revolution. This chapter, however difficult, represents another turn in that ongoing narrative, not the end of the culture, but its continued evolution toward its fullest expression. What version of that story gets written next depends on choices made now, by industry leaders, by artists, by fans, and by a culture deciding which aspects of its past to carry forward and which to leave behind. The question isn't whether hip-hop will survive this moment of accountability, but what vision of hip-hop will emerge from it, and whether that vision finally aligns its internal practices with the justice it has always demanded from the world. But what we do know is this: silence is no longer a shield, and for hip-hop, a genre born from voice, that may be the most important transformation of all. You've been listening to The Soft Scoop, where the beats are slower and the truths come softly. Until next time, rest well.